Statement of Margarito Flores, June 4th, 2009. Introduction. My name is Margarito Flores. I've testified before this grand jury on a number of prior occasions. I'm giving this statement freely and voluntarily, pursuant to proffer letters with the United States Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of Wisconsin and the Northern District of Illinois. I've read this statement carefully and have been given the opportunity to go over it with my attorney and to make changes. This statement is just a summary and does not contain every detail I remember about the rug trafficking activities in which I participated. If asked additional questions, I could provide more detail, as with my previous statement, and as I will discuss in greater detail later in this statement. Although no promises have been made to me regarding my cooperation or the sentence I will ultimately receive, I am cooperating with the government in the hope of receiving a reduced sentence in a federal case where I have been indicted on federal narcotics charges. So right there, he's letting them know, y'all haven't told me nothing. I haven't heard a word about my sentencing. Now, for those that know, we've already had a paperwork party where we went over that sentencing memo. You can find it in the Flores Twins playlist. You can find it on the channel if you just go through the uploads. It's a recent upload. We went through their sentencing memo where they petitioned to the judge that they should get the lower side of the 10 to, I believe it was 16-year sentence. At the end of the day, the judge gave them 14 and a half years. So he sent them towards the higher side of the sentence. He's right there already letting you know, I haven't heard nothing from you. We haven't talked about this. What's going on? Just putting the bug in their ear like, Papa, we're going to have the sentencing conversation. Because I'm giving y'all shit and y'all giving me nothing. As I've testified previously, since approximately 1998, my twin brother Pedro Flores, who I will generally refer to in this statement as Pedro, and I have been responsible for the distribution of thousands of kilograms of brocaine in Chicago, Illinois, and elsewhere. Pedro and I have acted as partners in the rug business, and while we each perform different roles, we are generally aware of each other's activities and we coordinate our business together. Throughout this statement, I will refer to our rug trafficking organization as the Flores DTO. In terms of our operation in Chicago, Illinois, and the rest of the United States, Pedro held the primary responsibility. I was primarily responsible for coordinating the receipt of rugs from our sources of supply in Mexico. This statement will talk about our rug trafficking in general, but will focus primarily on our interactions with two of our primary sources of supply, Joaquin Guzman Loera, who I know as El Chapo or Chapo Guzman, and members of his organization, and Ismael Zambada Garcia, who I know as El Mayo or Mayo Zambada, and members of his organization. A historical summary of narcotics trafficking. In approximately 1998, Pedro and I started distributing brocaine in Chicago. By approximately 1999, Pedro and I had expanded our business and were selling wholesale quantities of brocaine to a large customer base throughout Chicago. From approximately 2000 through 2008, we steadily increased the volume of our business, which I will describe later in detail. From 2006 through 2008, we were coordinating at its peak the distribution in Chicago to our customer base of approximately 1,500 to 2,000 keys of brocaine per month. From approximately 2000 to 2007, our Mexican sources of supply primarily delivered brocaine to us in Chicago. Beginning in approximately late 2006, we expanded our business and began also receiving brocaine in Mexico and Los Angeles. When we received brocaine in places other than Chicago, this brocaine was generally transported in tractor trailers with hidden compartments or traps located in the roof. These same trap compartments were used to transport money from the sale of brocaine. In addition to these tractor trailers, we also used freight trains to transport brocane. Although we had customers in several cities, most of the time, the brocane that Pedro and I distributed in the United States at one time passed through Chicago. From Chicago, we distributed the brocane to our customers throughout the United States, although the majority of our major customers were in the Chicago area. B. Moved to Mexico. In approximately late 2003, I went to Mexico on vacation. Once I was there, I decided that it would be better to stay than go back to Chicago, and from that point on, I lived in Mexico. Shortly thereafter, Pedro made a similar move and joined me in Mexico. Before Pedro left Chicago, we made arrangements to continue selling brocane in the United States by setting up a distribution and money collection network, allowing us to operate from Mexico. As Pedro and I continue to take delivery of and distribute brocane, our organization continued to grow. So there's no mention right there of P having to get his ass out of Chicago because the heat was on him from that Mexico case. You know what I'm saying? So there's no mention of that there. I guess probably that just has something to do with something else. C. Summary of the structure of the Flores DTO. In running our narcotics trafficking business, we dealt broadly speaking with three groups of people. The first group was our sources of supply of brocane and heroin in Mexico. These individuals obtained large quantities of brocane, heroin, MJ, and other narcotics in Mexico, and we obtained large shipments of rugs from them that we in turn sold in the United States. The second group was our workers, or crew, in the United States. Individuals who, at our direction, took delivery of large shipments of brocane and heroin and distributed those rugs to our customer base, and in turn received packaged and returned large amounts of money to us in Mexico. These individuals worked at our direction, and we paid them to provide these services to us. The third group was our wholesale customers in the United States. Pedro and I maintained approximately 30 large customers for brocane and heroin in the United States in 8 principal cities: Chicago, New York, Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, Cincinnati, Columbus, Detroit, and Los Angeles. We also had a large wholesale customer in Vancouver, Canada. When we took delivery of a load of brocane, on almost all occasions, we either took delivery in Chicago or took delivery elsewhere in the United States and arranged to have the rugs transported to Chicago, where we distributed the rugs to our customers. We maintained several warehouses and stash houses in Chicago and other cities where our crew unloaded shipments of rugs for delivery to customers, and then in turn counted and packaged money from payments for those rugs. Generally, we made deposits of money to our Mexican sources of in supply in Chicago or Los Angeles for drugs that we received in the United States. Legal documents even got typos. That's just facts. I am aware that these deposits were then transported to Mexico because in most instances, one of our workers would go to the stash houses belonging to our sources of supply in Mexico to verify that the count of the money was correct. For rugs that we received in Mexico, we generally made money deposits in Mexico. Regardless of where we deposited the money, from my conversations with our sources of supply, I am aware that the money was ultimately transported to our Mexican sources of supply. I understand that all of the money deposited to our sources of supply that was collected from our customers and transported to Mexico was provided to our sources of supply in order to perpetuate our rug trafficking activity. Then we got a big old redacted image. I don't know if it's an image. I don't know if these are paragraphs. I don't know what it is, but it's mad redacted. They were definitely young Thundercats at this point in the game, 25 years old, and already had their career in the rug trafficking world. Went from the bottom to the top. All good things come to an end, right? So a bunch of redacted stuff here. And then we got number 2. Where they stopped there was they were growing their business. They made sure that their connects in Mexico were getting paid. Everything was gravy. Now they get to number 2. And they got 2 names here that I don't know. maybe as I read on, I'll figure out who it is. If you guys got any ideas, y'all let me know. Alfredo and Myra, last name unknown. In approximately 2005, this is still Jay talking. In approximately 2005, I met a man who I know as Alfredo. I do not know Alfredo's last name. I was introduced to Alfredo by my brother Pedro. My brother had already known him for several months. The first time that I met him was in a hospital in Guadalajara, while Alfredo was recovering from plastic surgery. Alfredo told me that he was a lifelong friend of Chapo's and that he is Chapo's son. Chapo's son, Alfredo's godfather. I understood from a conversation with Alfredo that he assisted Chapo with some of Chapo's logistical matters. On behalf of Chapo, on certain occasions, Alfredo organized the transportation of brocane from Colombia to Mexico in airplanes, was involved in the transportation of brocane from Colombia to Mexico in submarines and submergibles, or semi-submersible vessels, used to evade law enforcement and the military when moving brocane across the open ocean, and facilitated the transportation of brocane in rail cars, planes, trains, automobiles, submarines, submersibles, floaty devices in your arm floaties, wherever they could stick it, they stuck it. Pause. Wow. Crazy. Shortly after I met Alfredo, I also met his wife. Now they redacted her name here, but we got it up here. It's Myra. His wife Myra. I believe that Myra's last name is the same as Alfredo's. However, I do not know what it is. I've been shown number 6, which is a photograph of, worked closely with her husband in transporting both brocane and brocane proceeds. Together with Myra, Alfredo handled the logistics of transporting large shipments of bulk currency from rug proceeds, including the transportation of payments made to Chapo by his customers and payments made by Chapo to his sources of supply. In addition, Alfredo and Myra exchanged money from the currency of one nation to another. They was collecting money, cleaning money. What's it called? When you turn it into somebody else's money, different nations' money. In late 2006 or early 2007, Pedro and I entered into an agreement with Alfredo and his wife to establish a series of companies that would allow us to more easily move brocane throughout the United States. At this point, Pedro and I were moving almost all of the brocane that we distributed in semi-trucks and trailers with trapped compartments in the roof. While this system worked very well for us, we wanted to have a backup plan or insurance policy to supplement the trucks. Alfredo had previously told Pedro and I that he was involved with a train company in the 1990s as well as early 2000s with a person that I knew as Redacted. Due to Alfredo's prior experience in dealing with the trains, Pedro and I thought he would be a good person to approach regarding our idea to branch out into train transportation. Pedro and I decided to invest approximately $600,000 with Alfredo and Myra to set up an importing business and a logistics company. We understood that the companies would be legitimate and would actually import and sell goods. However, the real purpose for these companies was to serve as a front that would allow us to transport brocane by train. Sheesh. Pedro and I told Alfredo that we were willing to invest money and wished to use the trains to transport our brocane, but we did not want to be responsible for running the businesses, so we allowed Alfredo and Myra to decide what kind of companies to create. We later learned that they decided to establish a furniture importation company. We agreed that, in addition to providing the $600,000 in startup money, that we would also pay Alfredo and Myra a fee each time we used the train. On average, we paid Alfredo and Myra approximately $1,000 per kilo of brocane that we moved by train. While Pedro and I did not participate directly in making decisions for the businesses, Alfredo and Myra would occasionally ask us for our advice and would let us know what was going on with the companies. After the company was started, we learned that Alfredo and Myra had hired a man they referred to as Redacted. Pedro and I also knew 3 brothers who participated in setting up the companies. The brothers' last names was Redacted. While I met all 3 brothers at one point, I knew Redacted the best. I've been shown exhibit number 7, which is a photograph of Redacted. The Redacted brothers were in charge of loading and unloading the trains at the warehouses near the train lines that Alfredo and Myra had set up. Once this operation was up and running, we began using it to transport brocane from Los Angeles to Chicago in the walls of rail cars. The first load that we moved was in late 2007. In approximately October or November 2008, Pedro and I arranged to have 200 keys of brocane transported from Los Angeles to Chicago using the train system that we set up with Alfredo and Myra. On approximately November 3rd, 2008, Alfredo and Myra and Redacted and others came to visit Pedro and I at Pedro's house in Guadalajara. While Alfredo was at Pedro's house, we discussed many things, including the load of brocane that we were currently moving with the train. One of the 747 airplanes that Chapo uses to transport brocane, which Alfredo organized, and an impending load of brocane Chapo was bringing from Colombia in a submarine that Alfredo, Pedro, and I had all invested in. We heard about this deal that they had where they invested in these bricks that was coming through this submarine. So now we get in the story. Pedro recorded this conversation by placing a digital recording device in my pocket. I've had the opportunity to listen to the recordings contained on a CD labeled Recorded Calls. I have initialed the exhibit sticker. On this CD are true and accurate copies of recordings that Pedro and I made, including a conversation that Alfredo, Redacted, Pedro, and I had on approximately November 3rd, 2008. I also recorded a portion of this conversation as well on a cell phone. So when he came to Peter's house in Guadalajara, Alfredo, Myra, and all the Redacted family, when they got there, they used a recording device, a digital recorder in his pocket. Risky shit, boy. And also recorded on cell phones. They got the whole conversation down. At the time that Alfredo first came to my house, the only brocane that I was aware was in transit in the train was the 200 keys belonging to Pedro and I. However, during our conversation, Alfredo informed me that he had placed an additional 76 keys of his own brocane in the same train car. Alfredo told Pedro and me that he was running very short on money and asked if we would be willing to purchase these 76 keys. I told him that we would only purchase the brocane if we could agree to a price that would allow Pedro and me to make enough money, to make enough of a profit from the brocane to make it worth taking on the risk of the extra keys, which he already stuffed on the train, which is crazy. You're taking liberties with this whole train situation. Alfredo asked Pedro and me what the wholesale value of brocane was in Chicago. We told him that at the time it was between $30,000 and $30,500. Eventually, Pedro and I agreed to purchase the load of 76 keys of brocane for approximately $2,166,000, which worked out to $28,500 per key. Approximately 1 week later, the train carrying the brocane arrived at Alfredo's warehouse in Chicago. I sent my workers to provide Alfredo's workers with the Nissan Murano in which to place the 200 keys of brocane that already belonged to Pedro and I, as well as the 76 keys that we had agreed to purchase from Alfredo. Once the train arrived in Chicago, Alfredo's workers loaded the Murano, and Redacted called Pedro to tell him that the keys were ready to be picked up. Pedro and I then called our worker Cesar Perez and told him meet Alfredo's worker at a Mexican restaurant located near 159th Street. A short time later, I talked to Cesar, who confirmed that he picked up the 276 keys. During the same conversation on approximately November 3rd, Alfredo also explained to Pedro and me, the specifics of how Chapo's airplane operation worked to transport brocane from Central and South America to Mexico. This was not the first time that Alfredo talked to us about the airplane. Essentially, Alfredo explained that Chapo had multiple 747 aircraft that he used for this purpose. Alfredo explained that the 747s were cargo planes with no seats in the body of the aircraft. Chapo would arrange to have a shipment of clothing sent to Central or South America as part of a humanitarian aid project. Once the planes landed in Central or South America, The clothing was offloaded and up to 13 tons of brocane was loaded onto the plane for the return trip to Mexico. The planes would land at Mexico City International Airport, and Chapo would then use his contacts to have the brocane offloaded from the planes and get the brocane out of the airport. Alfredo explained specifically about the last few trips with the plane. Alfredo told us about occasions in which he organized for Chapo's trips, bringing back 1,700, 7,000, and 12,000 keys of brocane. In addition to her involvement in the train companies, Myra also was involved in the transportation of bulk currency from Chicago or Los Angeles to Mexico. For a fee of approximately 3 to 7% of the money transported, Myra would guarantee that she would transport money safely from one location to another. From my conversations with Myra, I know that she was aware that the money that she transported was proceeds from the sales of rugs, and that Myra was transporting the money in order to perpetuate the rug conspiracy in which we were all involved. We moved money through redacted transportation systems, through Myra's transportation system, approximately dozens of times. The money that she transported on our behalf ranged from shipments of approximately 100,000 up to several millions of dollars. Myra told me that she transported the money by both cars and planes. When large sums of money were being transported, Myra would use private planes to move the money. Redacted, 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 redacted. Here we go, number 3. Damn. Narcotics trafficking with the Chapo Guzman and Mayo Zambada cartels. A. Means and methods of narcotics transactions with the Chapo Guzman and Mayo Zambada cartels. Planes, trains, and automobiles, y'all. Planes, trains, and automobiles. Through Pedro's and my discussions with Chapo, Mayo, Juancho, Olivares, Vicente, Zambada, Alfredillo, and others, beginning with our face-to-face meetings in May 2005, Pedro and I agreed with Chapo, Mayo, and their lieutenants that they would supply Pedro and me with brocane in the United States, and later with heroin. While it would vary from transaction to transaction, we agreed that Chapo and Mayo would be responsible for the brocane until it arrived in certain locations, and then Pedro and I would be responsible for it from that location until it was sold to our customers in the United States. In general, in our dealings with both Chapo and Mayo, we became responsible for the brocane in Chicago, although, starting in early 2008, we also occasionally took possession of brocane in Los Angeles and then transported it to Chicago. Chapo and Mayo bore the responsibility for having the brocane and heroin cross the U.S.-Mexico border. Due to the fact that we generally took receipt of narcotics in the United States, the manner in which Chapo and Mayo crossed the narcotics into the United States was not part of our general dealings with Chapo and Mayo, and not of our concern. When I say that Chapo or Mayo or I would be responsible for the brocane, what I mean is that when Chapo or Mayo was responsible for the brocane, if something happened to it, such as a theft or a seizure by law enforcement, Pedro and I would not have to pay for the brocane. When Pedro and I were responsible for the brocane, we would have to pay Chapo or Mayo regardless of whether we actually sold the brocane to our customers or lost it in some way. Essentially, whoever was responsible for the brocane at any given point bore the risk of losing the brocane. The location used to determine who would be responsible for the brocane was also used to determine the price of the brocane. Brocane and all drugs essentially have a market value that heavily depends on the geographic location. For example, a key of brocane may have a wholesale value of $18,000 in Guadalajara, Mexico, but that same key of brocane could have a wholesale market value of $30,000 in Chicago. Unlike our relationship with Arturo Beltran Leiva, which I discussed previously, so there's more to this paperwork that I don't have. We're going to get it though. Which I discussed previously, in which we generally acquired the brocane in Mexico and bore responsibility for its transportation across the border. Chapo and Mayo generally supplied us with the brocane in Chicago, in Los Angeles, and thus we paid a higher price because they took more risk getting it across the border. That's something that for sure has been said on this channel by them themselves. These guys don't know how to take losses. That was something that set the Twins apart. They understood that losses were part of the game and breakage was part of the game. So they didn't concern themselves with it. They concerned themselves with scaling up. But these guys, these bosses, they're not going for it. You guys to pay me. That's how the relationship between them kind of happened. Again, I don't know if you know the story, but Surviving El Chapo playlist, one of the brothers was kidnapped. The other brother had to go see, this is the first time he meets Chapo. He has to go see Chapo about this kidnapping. Turns out somebody else that owes Chapo 10 million blamed them for the 10 million. So Chapo told them, go get proof that this guy's lying. They came back with the proof and he said, okay, cool. I'll take care of that. You still owe me 10 million. So these guys were not taking losses. Shout out Upper Echelon on the check-in. Salutes to you, sir. Hundreds up. And what a coinky dink. We was just talking about you. Right? But yeah, so that's how that went down. So absolutely, those bosses did not know how to take losses. Chapo, Mayo, Juancho, Olivares, Vicente, Alfredillo, and others used a similar system when transporting payment for the shipments of Brocaine and Sherwin. As I previously discussed, when Pedro and I sold Brocaine to our customers in the United States, we collected payment in form of U.S. currency. We then consolidated that currency, packaged it, and transported it in bulk back to our sources of supply in Mexico. Chapo, Mayo, Juancho, Olivares, Vicente, Alfredillo, and I agreed that Pedro and I would deliver payment for Brocaine loads in the form of bulk currency, which we generally transferred to their couriers in Chicago and Los Angeles. I am aware that this money was delivered to safe houses belonging to Chapo and Mayo's organization and then transported back to Chapo and Mayo through their transportation networks. I am aware that these deposits, were transported to Mexico, were transported to Mexico because in most instances, one of our workers would go to the stash houses belonging to Chapo Mayo's organization in Mexico to verify that the count of the money was correct. Regardless of where we deposited the money, from my conversations with Chapo and Mayo and other sources of supply, I am aware that the money was ultimately transported to them in Mexico. I understand that all of the money deposited to our sources of supply that was collected from our customers and transported to Mexico was provided to Chapo and Mayo in order to perpetuate our rug trafficking activities. During the course of our business relationship with Chapo and Mayo, I became aware of many of their respective organizations, means, and methods of importing Brocaine to Mexico from Colombia, and then further exporting that Brocaine from Mexico to the United States. I learned of these means and methods from conversations with Chapo, Mayo, Juancho, Olivares, Vicente, Zambada, and Alfredillo. And in certain instances from investments that my brother and I made in loads with Chapo and Mayo's organization. It was fairly typical that my brother and I would be informed of the progress of Brocaine shipments from Colombia to Mexico and the methods that the organizations were using to transport those shipments. Pedro and I often had already agreed to purchase significant quantities of those shipments, and we would be apprised by Juancho, Olivares, or Vicente of the timing of the shipment's arrival and the methods used to deliver them. In many instances, we would be invited to inspect large shipments of Brocaine upon its arrival in Mexico, to inspect the quality and select portions that we wished to buy. Among other methods, I am personally aware that Chapo and Mayo and their organization used 747 cargo planes to import ton quantities of Brocaine from Central and South America to Mexico. I am also aware that Chapo, Mayo, and their organizations use smaller airplanes, submarines, tractor trailers with trap compartments, container ships, fishing vessels, go-fast boats, buses, trains, and personal automobiles to transport Brocaine, first from Central and South America to Mexico, and then from Mexico into the United States. I am also aware that Chapo and Mayo use a network of tunnels to transport narcotics into the United States. I am also personally aware of many other means and methods used by Chapo and Mayo's organization in order to secure the safe passage of rugs from Colombia through Mexico and into the United States. And then we're redacted. Closing remarks. In total, since 1998, Pedro and I were responsible for the distribution of thousands of keys of brocane from Chicago and elsewhere, supplied to us by our sources of supply in Mexico. Other than the few shipments of brocane and heroin that were seized by the authorities or stolen, all of this brocane was distributed to our customers. In the spring of 2008, I began the process of my cooperation and have been cooperating ever since. In addition, although I am not cooperating in exchange for any benefits received, the federal government has provided some assistance in relocating my family from Mexico to the United States. Although no promises have been made to me regarding my cooperation, I am cooperating in hopes of receiving a reduced sentence in a federal case where I've been indicted on federal narcotics charges. With some assistance from the DEA and the U.S. Attorney's Office, Pedro and I moved our wives, our children, our brothers and his wife and children, our two sisters and their children, our father, our mother, and the mother of two of my children, I knew that once the people I have talked about today found out I was cooperating, they would try to unalive me and my family. As far as I know, nobody knows where my family is living, and I am being kept in protective custody. This statement is an accurate and truthful summary to the best of my recollection. It does not describe everything that I know about the events described or other events that are not described. Signed, Margarito Flores. Dated June 4th, 2009.